Break time equals 700 ms /. A telegraph key clicks in the dark. 13 words. That is all it takes. In the summer of 1870, a German statesman takes a telegram, a dull, polite report of a conversation that had gone nowhere, and he crosses out 13 words. He sharpens it. He makes it an insult. And then he hands it to the newspapers. Within 6 days, two of the most powerful empires in Europe are at war. Break time equals 700 ms /. 47 years later, another German, a foreign minister, sits down to write another message. This one is longer. 186 words, in secret code, sent across the ocean to Mexico. He never imagined that a British codebreaker in a locked room in London would read every word. And that those words would drag the United States into a world war, and doom Germany to defeat. Break time equals 700 ms /. 2 telegrams. 2 short messages, tapped out on 2 strips of paper. Between them, they helped ignite both world wars, and killed 80 million people. This is the story of how words on paper killed more human beings than any weapon ever built. This is the chain that connects them, and by the end, you will understand how the entire 20th century was set in motion by 2 men, 2 telegrams, and the space of a single sentence. Break time equals 700 ms /. To understand the first telegram, you have to understand what one man wanted more than anything in the world. His name was Otto von Bismarck, and he was the most dangerous mind in Europe. Minister-President of Prussia, the largest of the dozens of German states that, in 1870, were still separate, squabbling, and weak. Bismarck had one obsession: to weld those scattered German states into a single, unified empire, ruled from Berlin. And he understood something that most politicians never grasp. Nothing unites a divided people faster than a common enemy. And a common war. He had said it out loud, years before, in a speech that horrified the polite politicians of his day. The great questions of the age, he declared, would not be settled by speeches and majority votes, but by iron and blood. And this was not idle talk. This telegram would not be Bismarck's first engineered war. It would be his third. Already he had maneuvered Prussia into a short, sharp war against Denmark, and seized 2 provinces. Then he had provoked a war against Austria, the other great German power, and crushed it in 7 weeks, knocking Austria out of German affairs forever. 2 wars, 2 victories, each one a carefully laid trap. Bismarck did not blunder into wars. He built them, the way an engineer builds a bridge, deliberately, patiently, and always for a purpose. France would simply be the largest and most important of them all. The final piece. The war that would forge the empire. Break time equals 700 ms /. Across the border stood that enemy, France, and its emperor, Napoleon III, nephew of the first Napoleon, and desperate to prove he was worthy of the name. France did not want a strong, united Germany on its doorstep. And Bismarck knew that if he could provoke France into attacking Prussia, the other German states would rush to Prussia's side, and out of that war, a German nation would be born. All he needed was a spark. And in July of 1870, a diplomatic quarrel over who should sit on the empty throne of Spain handed him one. The details barely matter. What matters is what happened next, at a quiet spa town called Bad Ems, where the King of Prussia was taking the waters. The French ambassador approaches the Prussian king, Wilhelm I, and makes a demand, that Prussia promise, forever, never to support a German prince for the Spanish throne. The king is annoyed by the ambassador's tone, but he is a gentleman. He politely declines to give such a promise, and courteously ends the conversation. That is all. A stiff but civil exchange between two diplomats. There is no insult. There is no threat. There is, in truth, no story at all. Break time equals 700 ms /. An aide writes up an account of the meeting and sends it by telegram to Bismarck in Berlin, for his information. And this dull, harmless little telegram, is the most important document you have never heard of. Because Bismarck reads it over dinner. And he sees, instantly, what it could become. He takes out a pen. He does not add a single lie. He simply cuts. He removes the polite phrases, the courtesies, the softening words, 13 words in all, until the king's calm refusal reads like a curt, contemptuous snub. He shortens it. He hardens it. And the same meeting that had been so civil now looks, on paper, like a deliberate humiliation. Break time equals 700 ms /. Bismarck later admitted exactly what he had done. He said the edited telegram would have the effect of a red rag on the Gallic bull. He releases his version to the press that very evening. By the next morning, it is on the front page of every newspaper in France. And France explodes. To French readers, it looks as though their ambassador has been publicly insulted, their nation mocked. Crowds pour into the streets of Paris chanting for war. Napoleon III, weak and desperate to look strong, is swept along by the fury. On July 19, 1870, just 6 days after the meeting at Bad Ems, France declares war on Prussia. Break time equals 700 ms /. Bismarck had done it. Without firing a shot, without telling a single outright lie, he had turned a polite conversation into a war, by cutting 13 words from a telegram. He had the war he wanted. But even Bismarck, brilliant, ruthless, 10 steps ahead of everyone, could not imagine what he had just set in motion. Because the empire he was about to build would, one day, start 2 world wars. Break time equals 700 ms /. The war was a catastrophe for France, and it was over almost before it began. The Prussian army was a machine unlike anything Europe had seen. Faster, better organized, armed with modern steel artillery and moved by railway with terrifying precision. The French army, for all its courage, was outdated and outmatched at every turn. Within weeks, French armies were being surrounded and destroyed. And then came Sedan. At the Battle of Sedan, an entire French army, and Emperor Napoleon III himself, was trapped and forced to surrender. The Emperor of France, a prisoner of war. It was a humiliation almost beyond belief. At Sedan, more than 100,000 French soldiers laid down their arms in a single day. And with the emperor himself a prisoner, the government in Paris simply collapsed. Within 48 hours of the news reaching the capital, the crowds rose up, swept away the empire, and declared France a republic once more. But the new republican government refused to surrender. Even with their army destroyed and their emperor captured, the French fought on, raising new armies of raw recruits, throwing them against the Prussian veterans in a desperate, doomed effort to save the nation. It only prolonged the agony. The fresh French armies were shattered one after another. And the Prussians pressed on, deeper into France, toward the ultimate prize. Break time equals 700 ms /. But the war did not stop there. Prussian armies marched on Paris and laid siege to the greatest city in Europe. They ringed it with guns, cut it off from the world, and settled in to starve it into surrender. Through a bitter winter, the 2 million people of Paris slowly starved. And the story of what they ate as the food ran out is one of the strangest and most desperate in the history of any city. First they ate the horses, tens of thousands of them, until the boulevards fell silent. Then, as hunger tightened its grip, the butchers of Paris began to sell dog, and cat, and rat. A plump rat, caught in the sewers, could fetch 2 francs at market, a small fortune, and restaurants served them dressed up with fine sauces to disguise what they were. And then, in the final weeks, the city turned to the zoo. The animals of the Jardin des Plantes were slaughtered one by one and sold to the wealthy. Antelope, camel, and kangaroo appeared on Christmas menus. And at last they came for the 2 great elephants of Paris, beloved by every child in the city. Castor and Pollux, the pair were called. They were shot, butchered, and eaten. That is how far a proud capital had fallen. Break time equals 700 ms/. Cut off from the rest of France, Paris refused to be silenced. Over the 4 months of the siege, the city launched more than 60 hot air balloons, sewn from silk and cotton, crewed by volunteers, floating its letters, its officials, even carrier pigeons, up and out over the Prussian guns in the dark. It was magnificent. It was hopeless. And all the while, Prussian shells rained down on the sleeping neighborhoods, killing civilians in their beds. Break time equals 700 ms/. After more than 4 months, the starving city could hold out no longer. Paris surrendered. And the greatest nation in continental Europe lay utterly, totally defeated. And while Paris was still surrounded, Bismarck arranged the final, perfect humiliation. He would not simply defeat France. He would be reborn as an empire on France's own soil, in the most sacred room in the country. On the 18th of January, 1871, they gathered in the Hall of Mirrors at the Palace of Versailles, and I need you to see this room, because we are going to stand in it again. Picture it. A vast gallery, 240 feet long. 17 towering arches of mirrors running down one wall, facing 17 great windows on the other, so that light and reflection blaze back and forth without end. A painted, gilded ceiling. Rows of enormous crystal chandeliers. It was the most magnificent room in Europe, built by the Sun King of France to overawe the world with French glory. And on this day, it was filled, wall to wall, with Germans. Hundreds of Prussian officers in spiked helmets and dress uniforms, their swords and medals reflected endlessly in the French mirrors. At the far end, on a raised platform, stood old King Wilhelm. And below him, in the white dress uniform of a cuirassier, stood Otto von Bismarck, who read aloud the proclamation of the new German Empire. When he finished, the generals raised their swords and the hall shook with a great roaring cheer. Hoch! 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 For Kaiser Wilhelm, Emperor of all Germany. And not a single Frenchman was permitted to be there. They were not conquered guests. They were simply erased, forced to read in the newspapers that their sacred palace had been used to crown their enemy. Break time equals 700 ms/. Read that again. The German Empire was not born in Berlin. It was born inside the palace of the defeated French king, a deliberate, calculated insult carved into the memory of an entire nation. And the terms of the peace that followed were just as savage. France was forced to pay a colossal war indemnity, 5 billion francs. And it was stripped of 2 of its provinces, Alsace and Lorraine, handed to the new Germany. That loss would poison the French soul for 2 generations. In classrooms across France, children were taught to never forget the stolen provinces. The word became a vow, revanche. Revenge. Break time equals 700 ms/. So look at what Bismarck's 13 edited words had created. Not just a war. An entire empire, unified, industrial, militarized, the most powerful state on the continent. And beside it, a France that would spend the next 47 years dreaming of payback. A loaded gun and a finger itching for the trigger, placed side by side in the heart of Europe. Remember this hall. The Hall of Mirrors at Versailles. Remember exactly how it feels tonight, German triumph, French humiliation. Because in 48 years, we are going to come back to this exact room. And everything will be reversed. Break time equals 700 ms /. For the next 4 decades, the fuse that Bismarck had lit burned quietly across Europe. And everyone could see the spark traveling, but no one could put it out. The new Germany was now the strongest power on the continent, and its neighbors were afraid. So Europe did what frightened nations always do. It divided into armed camps. On one side, Germany bound itself to Austria-Hungary and Italy. On the other, a terrified France reached out to Russia, and then to Britain. 2 vast alliances, each promising that an attack on one was an attack on all, like rows of climbers roped together at the edge of a cliff. And they armed. My God, how they armed. A naval race between Britain and Germany. Millions of men conscripted and drilled. Artillery, machine guns, battleships, all multiplying year after year. When Britain launched a new kind of warship, the dreadnought, so powerful it made every other battleship obsolete overnight, Germany raced to build its own. Then Britain built more. Then Germany. Year after year, the 2 richest nations on earth poured their wealth into steel leviathans, each terrified of falling behind the other. And on land, the generals drew up their plans for the war they all felt coming. Germany's plan was the most fateful of all, to win any future war by smashing France with one lightning blow before Russia could fully mobilize, a plan that depended on speed, on railways, on split-second timing, and on marching through neutral countries to do it. Everyone could feel it coming. Statesmen warned of catastrophe. And yet, trapped inside their alliances and their war plans and their fear, no one could find the break. Europe was a room slowly filling with gunpowder, and every great power was holding a match. Break time equals 700 ms /. All of it, every alliance, every dreadnought, every French dream of revenge, flowed directly from that unified German Empire. Which flowed from the Franco-Prussian War. Which flowed from 13 edited words. And in the summer of 1914, the fuse finally reached the powder. An assassination in the Balkans, a tangle of alliances, and within weeks the whole continent was at war, the war we now call the First World War. Break time equals 700 ms /. Everyone expected it to be short. Everyone was catastrophically wrong. The war ground into the trenches, a horror of mud and machine guns and barbed wire that swallowed a generation of young men. 2 enormous armies dug into the earth along a line that stretched from the sea to the mountains, and for 4 years, they barely moved. At battles with names that still make historians shudder, Verdun, the Somme, hundreds of thousands, then millions, of men were fed into the grinder. On a single day at the Somme, the British Army suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, in one day, to gain almost nothing. Whole villages of young men, back home, lost every son they had. And when the guns stopped, the line had moved a few hundred yards, and then it was someone else's turn to try, and die. Millions died to move the front line a few hundred yards. And by 1917, it was a bloody, exhausted stalemate that neither side could win. Germany was slowly strangling. A British naval blockade was cutting off its food and supplies. Time was running out. The German High Command knew that if they did not find a way to win soon, they would lose everything. Break time equals 700 ms /. And so, In desperation, Germany reached for two weapons at once. The first was unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking every ship near Britain, including neutral American ones. It was a gamble that risked dragging the United States into the war. The second weapon was an idea. A scheme so audacious, so reckless, that it would be written down in a single coded message, and it would change the fate of the world. The solution came in the form of 186 words. Break time equals 700 ms /. In January of 1917, the German Foreign Secretary, Arthur Zimmermann, hatched a plan to keep America out of Europe, by starting a war in America's own backyard. His logic was cold and simple, and born of desperation. Germany was starving under the British blockade, and its generals had concluded that there was only one way left to win, to unleash their submarines without restriction, and sink every single ship approaching Britain, neutral or not, until Britain itself was starved into surrender. But they knew the terrible risk. Sinking neutral American ships, and drowning American sailors and passengers, would almost certainly drag the United States into the war. The German High Command made a chilling calculation. They gambled that their submarines could strangle Britain in a matter of months, before America could raise, train, and ship an army across the Atlantic in time to matter. It was a race against the clock, with the fate of the world as the prize. So if America was going to enter the war anyway, Germany reasoned, it needed something to keep the Americans distracted and busy at home, far from the battlefields of Europe. His answer was Mexico. Germany would offer Mexico an alliance. If the United States declared war on Germany, Mexico would attack the United States from the south. And in return, this is the astonishing part, Germany promised to help Mexico reconquer the territory it had lost decades earlier. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Germany was offering to hand 3 American states to Mexico. Break time equals 700 ms /. Zimmermann put it all into a coded telegram, 186 words, and sent it toward the German ambassador in Mexico City. But here is where the story becomes almost unbelievable. Because of the British naval blockade, Germany's own telegraph cables had been cut. So how did Zimmermann send a secret message across the Atlantic? He sent it down an American cable. Sit with the irony of this, because it goes deeper than you think. The American president, Woodrow Wilson, was desperate to end the war by negotiation. To help Germany send him its peace proposals quickly and secretly, he had done something extraordinary. He had allowed the German government to send its coded diplomatic messages along a United States State Department cable. A private line, opened by America, specifically to make peace possible. And Germany used that very cable, the cable of peace, the cable of good faith, to transmit a secret plan for the armed invasion of the United States. The message plotting to hand Texas and Arizona to Mexico traveled to the New World along a wire that the American president had personally opened in the name of ending the war. But there was one more twist in that wire, a twist Germany never suspected. Because the American cable did not run straight across the Atlantic. On its way, it passed through a relay station in England. Every peace message Germany sent along Wilson's line of good faith was quietly copied, in the dark, by the codebreakers of Room 40. Break time equals 700 ms /. But that American cable ran through one crucial place on its way across the world. It ran through Britain. And in a locked room in London, known only as Room 40, sat the finest codebreakers in the world. They intercepted the strange coded message. And slowly, painstakingly, they began to break it apart, number group by number group. For months, these men had been quietly reconstructing Germany's most secret diplomatic cipher, a code of 10,000 words and phrases, each turned into a group of numbers. They had no key. They had rebuilt it piece by piece, like assembling a shattered vase in the dark, from every intercepted message they could get their hands on. On the morning of the 17th of January, 1917, the intercepted message landed on the desk of two men. One was a former publisher named Nigel de Grey. The other was a Presbyterian minister turned codebreaker named William Montgomery. The two of them bent over the strip of numbers and began to work. And as they matched group after group to the fragments of code they had painstakingly recovered, a sentence began to surface out of the meaningless digits. Then another. Germany. Mexico. An attack. And as the meaning became clear, the blood drained from their faces. Break time equals 700 ms /. De Grey did not even wait to finish. He rushed upstairs to the office of the head of naval intelligence and asked, in a shaking voice, whether he wanted to bring America into the war, because he thought he had the means to do it, right there in his hand. And as the rest of the words emerged from the code, they could not believe what they were reading. Germany. Mexico. An attack on the United States. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. Break time equals 700 ms /. The British had just been handed the single most explosive document of the entire war, a message that could bring the mighty United States into the fight on their side. It could win them the war. And yet, they did nothing. For 3 agonizing weeks, the British sat on the Zimmermann telegram and said nothing to the Americans. Break time equals 700 ms /. Why? Why would they hide the very thing that could save them? Because to reveal the telegram was to reveal 2 deadly secrets. The second was obvious, that Britain had broken Germany's most secret codes. If they simply showed Washington the decoded message, Germany might realize its cipher was cracked, change everything, and blind British intelligence for the rest of the war. But the first secret was even more dangerous. To prove the telegram was real, Britain would have to admit how it had obtained it, by secretly tapping and reading the diplomatic cables of the United States. The very cable that Wilson had opened in friendship. In other words, to win America over as an ally, Britain would have to confess that it had been spying on America all along. Think about that trap. The one piece of evidence that could bring America into the war on Britain's side was also proof that Britain had been betraying America's trust. Reveal it clumsily, and instead of an ally, they might make an enemy. So for 3 agonizing weeks, the British held the most valuable document of the entire war in their hands, and searched, desperately, for a way to use it without destroying themselves. So the British faced an impossible gamble. Hold the most powerful weapon of the war in their hands, and find a way to use it without revealing how they got it. Break time equals 700 ms /. The British devised a clever cover story. They secretly obtained a copy of the telegram as it had been resent from Washington to Mexico, a version they could plausibly claim to have stolen in Mexico, rather than plucked from America's own cables. Their secret was safe. And now they could act. In late February 1917, the British quietly handed the decoded telegram to the American government. And President Wilson, the man who had allowed Germany to use his cable in good faith, was, in his own word, astounded. Break time equals 700 ms /. On the 1st of March, 1917, the Zimmermann telegram exploded across the front page of every American newspaper. The reaction was volcanic. A foreign power had plotted to carve up the United States and hand its territory to a neighbor. Americans who had wanted nothing to do with Europe's war were suddenly furious. But some Americans refused to believe it. It was too outrageous, they said. It had to be a British forgery, a trick to drag America into the war. Break time equals 700 ms /. And then came the most extraordinary moment of all. The story could have died as a rumor. All Germany had to do was deny it. Instead, at a press conference, Arthur Zimmermann stood up and, for reasons historians still argue about, confirmed that the telegram was real. With a single sentence, he destroyed his own country's last hope of keeping America neutral. Break time equals 700 ms/. It is, perhaps, the worst admission in the history of diplomacy. The one man who could have called it a forgery instead swore that every word was true. Historians have argued about his reasons ever since. Perhaps he thought a denial would be exposed as a lie and make things even worse. Perhaps he was simply an honest man in a job that demanded deception. Whatever the reason, the effect was instant and total. Every American who had dismissed the telegram as a British trick now had it confirmed, by the German government itself. The mood of a whole nation flipped in a matter of days. A country that had spent 3 years determined to stay out of Europe's slaughter was suddenly demanding war. Men who had never wanted to fight now lined up at recruiting offices. The Zimmermann telegram had done what 3 years of sunken ships and drowned civilians had not quite managed to do. It had made the war personal. It was no longer about Europe. It was about Texas. About Arizona. About home. Break time equals 700 ms/. That was the end. On the 6th of April, 1917, the United States of America declared war on Germany. The sleeping giant was awake. And now the full weight of American industry and manpower began to cross the Atlantic. 2 million fresh American soldiers poured into France, at the exact moment the exhausted armies of Europe had nothing left to give. The German High Command understood exactly what was coming. They knew that once the full weight of America arrived, the war was lost. So in the spring of 1918, they gambled everything on one last, massive offensive, a desperate lunge to smash the British and French and win the war before the Americans could reach the front in strength. For a few terrible weeks, it nearly worked. The German armies broke through and surged forward, closer to Paris than they had been in years. And then the offensive ran out of men, out of supplies, out of hope. The exhausted German soldiers could not be replaced. But the American soldiers, fresh, fed, endless, just kept coming. Break time equals 700 ms/. The balance of the war tipped, and then it broke. Germany's last great offensives failed. Its armies fell back. Its people, starving under the blockade, began to collapse into revolution. And on the 11th of November, 1918, at 11 in the morning, the guns finally fell silent. Germany surrendered. The First World War was over. In the streets of London, Paris, and New York, millions wept and cheered. It was, they told each other, the war to end all wars. Never again would humanity be so foolish. Never again would the world sleepwalk into such slaughter. But in Germany, the mood was very different, and far more dangerous. Because the German people had been told, right up to the end, that they were winning. Their armies had never been driven back onto German soil. The surrender came not with the enemy at the gates of Berlin, but with the front still deep inside France and Belgium. And so, to millions of bewildered, humiliated Germans, the defeat made no sense. How could they have lost? Someone, they decided, must have betrayed them. A poisonous lie began to spread, that the German army had not been beaten in the field at all, but stabbed in the back by traitors and politicians at home. It was not true. But it did not need to be true. It only needed to be believed. And a failed painter, still lying in an army hospital, believed it with all his heart. Break time equals 700 ms /. The war was won. And now the victors turned to the question of punishment. Where would the defeated Germany be forced to sign away its power? The Allies chose the location with deliberate, deadly care. It was not chosen for its convenience. It was chosen for its memory. They chose Versailles. And within Versailles, they chose one particular room. Break time equals 700 ms /. The Hall of Mirrors. The very same room where, 48 years earlier, a triumphant Germany had proclaimed its empire on the ashes of French defeat. The same mirrors. The same golden ceiling. The same hall where Kaiser Wilhelm had been crowned while Paris starved. Break time equals 700 ms /. And the choice of this room was no accident. It was revenge, made of architecture. The man who chose it was the French Prime Minister, Georges Clemenceau. And Clemenceau was not reading about 1871 in a history book. He had lived it. As a young man of not yet 30, he had watched his own capital starve through the siege, watched France humiliated, watched the Germans crown their Kaiser in the palace of the French kings. For 48 years he had carried that wound. And now, as an old man of 77, he held the pen, and he knew exactly which room to choose. The same 17 arches of mirrors. The same crystal chandeliers blazing overhead. The same painted ceiling. Everything the German officers had seen reflected around them in triumph in 1871, now it would reflect their nation's disgrace. The mirrors did not care who won. They only reflected whoever stood before them. And in 1919, it would be the Germans standing where the victors had stood, with the whole world watching. Break time equals 700 ms /. Now, on the 28th of June, 1919, the two German representatives were brought into that same room, not as conquerors, but as the conquered. Some accounts say they were led in through a side entrance, kept apart, made to wait, and then walked the length of the gallery under the eyes of the men who had beaten them. And there they were made to sign a treaty that would strip their nation to the bone. This is the history echo. The same hall that humiliated France in 1871 now humiliated Germany in 1919. The wheel had turned exactly halfway around. The revenge that France had dreamed of for 47 years was now delivered, in the identical room where the insult had begun. The ceremony was staged with icy, deliberate cruelty. The victorious leaders, France's Clemenceau, Britain's Lloyd George, America's Wilson, took their places beneath the same golden ceiling where the Kaiser had been crowned. And then the two German representatives were led in, across the length of that enormous hall, past rows of silent, watching faces, to sign away their nation's power in front of the world. Witnesses said the two Germans looked like condemned men walking to the scaffold. They signed quickly, their hands unsteady, and were led out again. Outside, cannon boomed across the gardens of Versailles to announce to the world that it was done. The wheel that had begun turning in this room in 1871 had come full circle. Break time equals 700 ms /. And the terms were crushing. Germany lost its colonies and vast stretches of its territory, including, of course, Alsace and Lorraine, handed straight back to France. Its once mighty army was reduced to a token force of 100,000 men. It was forbidden tanks, an air force, submarines. And it was ordered to pay reparations so vast they were almost meaningless, a sum that would eventually be set at 132 billion gold marks. A debt designed to be impossible to pay. Break time equals 700 ms /. Worst of all was a single clause, the war guilt clause, which forced Germany to accept the entire blame for the war before the whole world. To a proud nation, it was not just a defeat, It was a brand of shame burned into its skin. And there were men in that very room who understood, even then, exactly what they were building. The French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, the man who had commanded the Allied armies to victory, read the terms of the treaty and turned away in disgust. It was too harsh to forgive, he warned, and too soft to destroy Germany for good. It left a wounded, resentful giant alive and dreaming of revenge. And then Foch spoke words that would prove almost supernaturally exact. An armistice for 20 years. He said it in 1919. The Second World War would begin in 1939, 20 years later, almost to the month. Foch had not made a guess. He had read the future in the terms of the treaty, because the terms of the treaty were writing that future in advance. Germans called it the Diktat, the dictated peace. And the humiliation of that room, the impossible debt, the economic ruin that followed, it did not create peace. It created a wound. Within a few years, that wound would fester into catastrophe. Germany's economy collapsed into hyperinflation so extreme that money became worthless, children played with bricks of banknotes in the street. Savings vanished overnight. A whole society descended into desperation, rage, and the hunger for someone to blame. The numbers became insane. By 1923, a single loaf of bread cost billions of marks. Workers were paid twice a day and ran to the shops at lunchtime, because by evening their morning wages would buy nothing at all. People carried their money in wheelbarrows and suitcases. Banknotes were cheaper than firewood, so families burned them to keep warm. The savings of an entire generation, the pensions, the nest eggs, the careful lifetime work of the German middle class, simply evaporated. And with the money went something even more dangerous, trust. Trust in the government. Trust in the future. Trust that if you worked hard and played by the rules, you would be safe. Break time equals 700 ms /. Into that void of ruined, humiliated, frightened people, the extremists came, from every direction, offering someone to hate and something to believe in. And in that desperation, in the bitterness of the Diktat, in the shame of that hall, in the ruins of that economy, a failed painter and army veteran found his audience. A man who promised to tear up the Treaty of Versailles, to avenge the humiliation, and to make Germany great again. His rise, and the war he would unleash, would kill 4 times as many people as the war that came before. Break time equals 700 ms /. We will not linger on what came next, because you already know it. Out of the ruins of Versailles rose the Second World War. The most destructive conflict in human history. From the fields of France to the gates of Moscow, from the Pacific Islands to the skies over every European city. By the time it ended in 1945, it had killed as many as 60 million people, soldiers and civilians, in numbers the mind cannot truly hold. 4 times the toll of the First World War. Whole cities erased from the map. Entire peoples targeted for destruction in crimes so vast they forced the world to invent new words to describe them. And at the very end, a new kind of weapon, a single bomb that could erase a city in a heartbeat, announcing that humanity had finally built the means to end itself. Break time equals 700 ms /. And even that was not the end of the chain. Out of the Second World War came a divided Europe. An Iron Curtain. A Cold War between 2 superpowers, and the shadow of nuclear weapons that hangs over us to this day. For nearly half a century after 1945, the world lived in the shadow of that divide, 2 superpowers glaring at each other across a ruined Europe, each armed with enough nuclear weapons to end civilization many times over. Proxy wars were fought on every continent. Empires dissolved. New nations were born. The map of the entire planet was redrawn in the aftermath of the war that had grown out of the war that had grown out of a telegram. The alliances we live under, the borders on our maps, the institutions meant to keep the peace, the very shape of the modern world, so much of it traces back, link by link, to those two telegrams. Break time equals 700 ms /. So let us follow the whole chain, all the way down, and hold on. 1870. A German chancellor cuts 13 words from a telegram. That single edit provokes the Franco-Prussian War. That war creates a united German empire, proclaimed in the Hall of Mirrors, and leaves France dreaming of revenge. That empire and that revenge divide Europe into armed camps, and in 1914 they collide in the First World War. 1917. A German foreign minister sends a telegram of 186 words. It is intercepted, decoded, and it drags the United States into that war. America tips the balance. Germany is defeated, and dragged back into the same Hall of Mirrors to be humiliated in its turn. That humiliation breeds the rage that gives the world the Second World War, 60 million more dead, and, out of its ashes, the Cold War and the world we live in right now. Break time equals 700 ms /. 2 telegrams. 2 short messages. 80 million human beings. We live, right now, in a world that was shaped by those words. Break time equals 700 ms /. We like to believe that history is driven by great forces, by armies, by economies, by the vast, impersonal tides of nations. And sometimes it is. But sometimes, the hinge on which the whole world turns is something almost unbearably small. A sentence rewritten by a clever man over dinner. A message intercepted in a locked room. Words on a strip of paper. Think about the sheer imbalance of it. On one side, an act so tiny it could be measured in words, 13 of them, 186 of them. On the other side, the cost, measured in empires toppled, continents set aflame, and 80 million human lives. There is no proportion between the cause and the consequence. And that is the most frightening truth of history, that the smallest human choices, made by ordinary, fallible men who could not see past the end of the week, can echo down through the decades and decide the fate of millions who were not yet even born. Bismarck thought he was building a country. Zimmermann thought he was buying a little time. Neither of them thought they were writing a death sentence for the 20th century. But that is exactly what they did. Break time equals 700 ms /. Bismarck cut 13 words, and lit a fuse he could not see the end of. Zimmermann wrote 186, and never dreamed a stranger in London would read them. Neither man could imagine the world their words would build, or the tens of millions who would die in it. Because history is a chain. And you can never be sure which small, forgotten link, which single sentence, is about to change absolutely everything. Break time equals 700 ms /.